Hello and welcome to Moneylife. This time I'm going to talk about a decision by the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal on SR Steel. It is not the last decision. The matter will still go to the Supreme Court, but we are probably at the last but one level. ArcelorMittal, as you know, a global name in the steel business, has made a bid of 42,000 crore to acquire SR Steel, and the Ruya family has been challenging this. In fact, challenging the act itself and the bankruptcy proceeding in every possible forum. Now, the Bankruptcy Code, or what is called the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, is a brand new legislation just about 3 years old, which was supposed to resolve our bankruptcy issues. It was the ultimate legislation which was going to work while all others failed. It improved India's ranking in the ease of doing business. But things haven't quite worked out. Every few days we are discussing how to improve this code and how to ensure that it doesn't go the way of all other previous bankruptcy codes. Now, let's talk about this judgment of 4th July by Justice Mukhopadhyay. Ideally, in an ideal situation, since the judgment ruled in favor of ArcelorMittal and said that they would get SR Steel, the company should have been celebrating. Instead, you had a cryptic one line from them saying we are studying the judgment. I hear that bankers are getting ready to go to court. Why is this? Because the NCLT has done something interesting. It has said that most bankers and asset reconstruction companies, which form what is called a committee of creditors, which in fact took SR for resolution to the National Company Law Tribunal, they are called secured creditors, which means that their lending to companies is usually backed by adequate collateral, sometimes personal guarantees, and it is what is called secured. They're financial creditors. Everybody else, which includes employees, people who are trade partners, who are contractors, who are supplying a variety of services to the company, are called operational creditors, because usually they do work for the company and the company owes them money for their services. At any given point of time, people are usually owed 3 to 6 months of money, and this is obviously not secured by anything. It is based on goodwill and understanding that the company, as a going concern, especially a large one, is going to continue to pay them. And businesses which supply these services are not small, they are huge, and they have no security, although they're doing good work. Now, what had happened is that the committee of creditors, or rather Indian banks, wanted the bulk of the money, which is the 42,000 crore, which again, let me say, doesn't cover all of the money that the SR Ruya family owed to bankers. There was a haircut involved, but whatever ArcelorMittal paid, the banks wanted the bulk of it for themselves, and leaving very, very little, small percentage for the operational creditors. Now, the NCLAT order has said that it's not going to work that way. The order has created an elaborate table. It has said that operational creditors also have some rights, and that the distribution of money has to be much more equitable and a lot more. Now, remember, it does not mean that the operational creditors are being specially favored or they're going to get 100% of their money, except maybe some small ones. They are also going to get money on a pro rata basis. The bankers don't like it because, in fact, there's a hue and cry among Indian bankers, or rather bankers globally, because they say that there is a big difference between secured loans and unsecured loans. And if they are put on par, then the whole concept of determining credit risk and determining interest rates is all going to be thrown out of the window, and you can't have a system that works like this. Now, in an ideal situation, they're perfectly right. In fact, that is how global markets work, that is how risk is assessed, and it ought to be true of India as well. So in fact, when I saw the NCLAT order and spoke to a few people, I agreed with this viewpoint until I began to read the order and look at it a lot more carefully. Then a slightly different picture emerges. It is this, which is that Indian banks, especially Indian public sector banks, are not operating the way of their foreign counterparts or the better banks in the world ought to behave when it comes to lending. First, they allow promoters to pad up the project costs in a big way. So to start with, the project is hugely inflated, sometimes as much as 50%. Second, they don't monitor the use of funds. They allow rampant diversion of funds, turn a blind eye, knowing fully well that money is being taken out from subsidiary companies and shell companies and going out of the country. They don't stop any of this. The accounts are repeatedly restructured. There's large waivers. It has happened with SR multiple times. That is why it's called a willful defaulter, because it was given plenty of opportunity, and each time there's a write-off, bankers don't even bother to protect their interest with some kind of clawback arrangement where when things improve, the steel industry is doing well, then some parts of the profit should at least come back later. So it's always a giveaway by public sector banks, and that giveaway, as I repeatedly say in these programs, is at our cost, the cost of the nation and the cost of the public. Now, on the other hand, look at who the operational creditors are. These are employees, workmen, people who provide essential services, whether it's transport, whether it's catering, whether it is, running some aspects of the ancillary industries. They in fact ensure that the company remains functioning. So in fact, when SR was introduced to the resolution process, because the promoters were willful defaulters, the company not only continued to function, but actually did quite well. In fact, one of the lawyers arguing for the bankers said that the operational creditors had actually done business worth a stupendous 55,000 crore when the resolution process was on. And there was a profit earned, which is also being maintained by the resolution professional, and this also came up for discussion in the judgment. So the judgment says that the number of operational creditors are far larger. It has asked for a chartered accountant and a law firm to be appointed by the resolution professional. This is the man who takes charge and decides how money will be distributed, presents the plan of resolution to the National Company Law Tribunal and the Appellate Tribunal. So he is still being cast with the responsibility to look at it and do a equitable distribution based on the formula suggested by the judgment. Is this going to destroy the IBC? I don't think so, because it's an Indian situation in a peculiarly Indian set of circumstances where banks have, sometimes succumbed to political pressure, and you can't have a set of operational creditors left out in the lurch, far less the employees of that company who ought to remain in the new establishment. Now, there's one little part of this judgment where maybe there is a valid point, which is sources tell me that one of the things that ArcelorMittal's side needs to worry about is that the judgment says that it has kept a window open for the trade creditors who are doing business with the company to even make a claim after Arcelor takes over. That I think is unfair, because remember, ArcelorMittal has made a bid. It has decided that it's worth 42,000 crore. In fact, over and above that, it's spending humongous amounts of money on litigation, delayed time, money wasted on various things. Now, to say that people can come back and make a claim afterwards seems unfair. So I think when this matter goes to the Supreme Court, that is something clearly that has got to be decided. But other than that, I think in the Indian situation, the bankruptcy law is going to work a little differently. And as I said, this law is just 3 years old. It has evolved fairly rapidly. There have been 2 amendments already, and these amendments have in fact taken into account a very Indian situation. In fact, in 2017, when the first resolution took place, which was Synergy Dore Automotive, Devashish Basu, who's the editor of Moneylife, had written that this over 90% of the money was written off in that case, and it created shockwaves. And he said that you need to look at an Indian situation and Indian circumstances which are peculiar, because the system will be gamed and every stakeholder will work at finding ways to game it. To be fair, actually, this government has worked very hard to make some changes rapidly. So 2 things have happened. Let's look at how the Act has evolved. The first amendment was actually to protect home buyers. They are also creditors in a similar situation. So people had bought homes from large realty companies. They have been paying monthly EMIs. The homes were never delivered. The companies went into bankruptcy, and banks began to claim all the money and said that a home buyer who has a 10-year loan, hasn't got a house, will continue to pay EMI, has no rights, and will continue to pay. This is a bizarre situation happening only in a very peculiarly Indian circumstance, where loans from banks is what allowed these builders to carry on and not drop prices and not sell and get into a rut. So even the Supreme Court was sympathetic. The government amended the act quickly and said home buyers will also be operational creditors. So 140 cases have been, that story hasn't ended, 140 cases have been filed by realty companies against this. The matter will be heard by the Supreme Court. But the act is amended, and it is the amendment that has been challenged. So there were two more amendments done after this. One was to Section 2 of the IBC, which made it applicable to personal guarantors of corporate debtors and proprietorship firms. So even if you guaranteed a loan, you were accountable. And this is important because remember, our banks had given a 15,000 crore personal guarantee, loans against a 15,000 crore personal guarantee to Prashant Ruya and Ravi Ruya in SR Investments. And both of them have claimed in the Debt Recovery Tribunal at Ahmedabad that they hardly have any assets which are 100% owned by them. So if there wasn't this amendment, they probably wouldn't even have been dragged and made accountable to pay for it. A third amendment was introduced through Section 29A, which said that companies who are willful defaulters, who have not paid up, couldn't bid for their own companies. Yes, the old act was, strangely enough, written in a manner that a defaulting promoter could have bid to take over his own company. And in fact, in a way, SR has virtually done that because it wants to, make a bid saying it will pay everybody, and the source of the money is fairly unknown. It is also unknown where it's going to come from suddenly, and that was one of the googlies that it had bowled in this whole bankruptcy process. So that is another amendment that was done. Other things have evolved in the process of hearings and legal precedents being set. So two important orders have happened which have made a lot of things very clear. Now, one thing that happens in India is whenever there is any settlement, whether it's a Satyam case or you're trying to resolve something after security scam, the revenue agencies, whether it's a sales tax department or the income tax, usually with exaggerated demands, come and file a case saying they have first right to any money that's recovered. And this usually throws everything in disarray and prevents any settlement from happening. Now, there are two orders about this. So in one case, there is a Supreme Court order, first of all, which said in August 2018, in the Moneylife Ispat case, that the provisions of Section 238 of the IBC will override anything inconsistent contained in any other act, including the Income Tax Act, which means that the Income Tax Act and the revenue agencies are no longer superior. It is the IBC that will prevail, the resolution that will prevail, and their demands will come later. Now, this was further clarified in an NCLAT order by Justice Mukhopadhyay and Raj Oil Mills. This happened in March 2019, where they said statutory dues owed to revenue agencies, whether it's sale tax, income tax and others, will be treated as operational debt. Very interestingly, the judge also said income tax, value added tax and other statutory dues arise out of when the company is actually operational. If the company is not operational, where are the dues? You pay tax when you're earning something. So money owed to them will be treated as operational credit and their dues will be on par with them, which means that they are not necessarily going to get everything that they demand. And like I said earlier, it used to be an exaggerated demand. It happened in the 92 scam and it went on and on forever. So the IBC has tried to resolve a couple of these issues. And the law is evolving. It is important that it evolves rapidly. It's a good thing that things have happened in a space of 3 years. Yes, there were very tight targets in 270 days. It was all supposed to be done It has dragged on, SR has dragged on for 530 days plus, but we need to get there fast. Remember, India has bad loans of over 10 lakh crore, and the government is constantly bailing out banks by putting money through the exchequer. Nirmala Sitharaman, as finance minister, has done it again in the budget last week. So it is in all our interests that the bankruptcy law works and evolves. And remember, there are 1,860 cases that have been admitted to the resolution process under the IBC so far. And believe it or not, 12,000 cases are still pending admission, which means that we are going to be a real mess if this act doesn't work. And it's going to be a bigger mess if people opt out of resolution and prefer liquidation. Because when a company is liquidated, you get a fraction of what you would get if there were a buyer. At this point of time, there is a lot of interest from buyers, not just Indian companies, not just global companies like ArcelorMittal or the Tatas who have taken over some of the best companies and paid a good price, but there are also institutions and stressed asset experts from abroad who are interested in the process at the moment. Government needs to ensure that we keep this act alive and working, ensure that the courts are not clogged so that these people don't lose interest and go away, because the Bankruptcy Act is important for all of us. Thank you.